All right, folks, welcome to our third lecture of the week for British North America in History 120. What I want to finish up the week talking about is labor systems in British North America. This is important because we're going to see essentially two, if not three, systems of labor begin to develop throughout the area controlled by British settlers. And this is going to have a direct impact on the future of the colonization and the country that follows in the wake of the revolution. Although I don't want to put too much, foresight and predestination to things just at this point. What we need to remember about the colonial world is that labor is scarce and expensive. There are very few people living in the wilderness. If you remember, we talked about the Massachusetts Bay Colony getting 20,000 people in its first 10 years. Well, that's just talking about the people coming in. It doesn't talk about the people dying, which they will, especially, I believe, the first year, half the settlers that come to Massachusetts Bay die. We have Native American wars that kill people. We have people being stupid. We have people dying of disease. We have all sorts of ways for people to die in the New World. People are also coming over to settle their own lands in the New World because their land is plenty and labor is scarce. And so we need to develop a way for people to come to the New World and act as laborers for those who have invested in large quantities of land and are now turning towards tobacco or wheat or rice as a cash crop in order to pay for their land and to act as a financial means for them to enhance their lives. One of the first things we do is in Virginia, we see the implementation of the headright system. What this means is, as a male head of the household, you're going to purchase so much land. Let's say you purchase 100 acres. But we're going to give you 50 acres of land for each additional person that you bring over as part of your household. Well, I have a wife. I have 2 kids. Those are 3 extra people. That's an extra 150 acres of land. It's a great way to expand the amount of land that you work. And it's a great way to encourage people to come over in larger units. The first people who settled in Virginia were single young men looking for adventure and quick fortune. These weren't men who wanted to farm. These weren't men who wanted to work. So we see the headright system as encouraging families and family labor on the landscape. What it also encourages is it encourages people to hire or bring over indentured servants. Indentured servants under the English law are English citizens who wish to make a voyage to the New World for any number of reasons, but they cannot pay for that. So what they do is they enter into a contract that brings them over to the New World. They're sponsored and paid for by somebody else. And when they are brought over to the New World, they then have to pay off that voyage by working a set number of years by contract. It varies between 3 and 7 years, depending on time period, who's doing it, where, etc. By and large, 7 years seems to be the standard for most of British colonization. If you pay for my voyage to bring me over to the New World, I will work for you for 7 years. At the end of that contract, if you're a nice person, you'll give that person a bit of land, you'll give that person maybe some cash, the ability to set themselves up as a laborer on their own. Because by bringing over an indentured servant, you're granted more land under the headright system that becomes part of your property holdings. And so, again, this is a great system if you're rich. You can pay for 5 and 10 and 20 people to come over as indentured servants who will provide you labor for 7 years if they survive. and you get land for 5 or 10 or 20 people if they survive. Well, whether or not they survive, you're granted that land when you bring them over. And if they don't survive, you don't have to give any of that land away. Matter of fact, if you get down to it, you don't have to give any of that land away, period. So indentured servitude is the first means of peopling North America with laborers to increase the profitability and productivity of the North American landscape without having high labor costs. But there's a big problem with indentured servitude. There's actually several big problems with it. First of all, these are Englishmen. Under the English common law, they have rights. You can't treat them negligently. You have to feed them. You have to take care of them. You have to honor the contract you enter into with these Englishmen. If you don't, they have rights before the court to sue you and to seek compensation for any abuse. So those people who will abuse their workers can be sued, can lose money, can be taken to court for their abusive ways with their laborers. And keep in mind, indentured servants have been turned to because we don't want to pay labor and we want to maximize profits. What that means, essentially, is that crops like tobacco and rice and indigo are not profitable when you have to pay for wage labor. If you pay a day or hourly wage to those individuals who work on your farms. That eliminates the profitability, especially with the amount of labor that goes into these crops because of their intensive nature and cultivation. There's also the fact that indentured servants eventually go free. If they live, they're supposed to go free at the end of their contracts. Some landowners, some people who sponsor indentured servants will find ways of extending the contracts of servants. If you get sick and you're unable to work, we're going to require you to work off the period of your sickness at the end of your contract. Well, we say, hey, I got the flu, I was sick for a week. That just means I work for an extra week. Imagine a world without antibiotics. Imagine a world where there's no real modern medicine, and that if you get sick, you could be laid up for weeks or months at a time. If you get severely injured, you could be crippled for life and provide a financial loss to the person who made your indenture, and you could either have that tacked on at the end, or you could never gain your freedom because you're not able to do the type of work that he wants you to do. Englishmen have rights. Englishmen who sign contracts do so with the expectation that those rights will be not infringed upon. People will abuse these rights. People will abuse these indentured servants and will find that they're taken to court and punished. But in 1619, a ship lands at Jamestown that changes the course of North American history. In 1619, a British, essentially pirate ship, which is flying Dutch colors, which is why so many textbooks refer to the first ship with slaves on it as a Dutch ship. It's come out in the last couple of years that this was actually an English ship which had which had pirated or captured slaves off of a couple of Dutch vessels in the Caribbean and had taken their cargo up and down the coast in North America to try and sell it off first to Caribbean settlers and then to people in Jamestown. That ship, flying under a Dutch flag, brought the first cargo of enslaved human beings to North America. and even further, not just to North America, but to Jamestown. Between 1620 and 1700, 21,000 Africans will be successfully transported to the coasts of mainland North America from the continent of Africa against their will. This is out of a total of 12 million Africans who were captured and successfully brought from Africa to New World colonies ranging from New York to Brazil. Most of these went to sugar colonies. If you study global history, the first great mercantilist fortunes were created on the sugar plantations of the Caribbean, where slaves worked themselves to death in as many as 3 years and sometimes in as few as 6 months. The slaves that were brought to the sugar plantations were by and large male. They were not brought there to reproduce. They were not there to have families. They were there to work by making sugar and working until they died. They were a cheap, replaceable engine for manufacturing sugar. They had no real rights under the English law. They were not seen as English. And so you could work these people as hard as you wanted to in order to maximize your profits. In the mainland North American slave colonies, which are all colonies prior to the American Revolution, slavery will exist in every English colony on the North American continent. Only 5% of the 12 million brought from Africa will land in British North America. Very few go to French North America. The Dutch will bring in even fewer slaves. This will create a labor system with a varying amount of upfront labor costs in investment, but which over the long term become cheaper forms of labor because you're not paying an hourly wage. You have to provide food and housing, and that's all. This will become the predominant labor system in the South, but as I said, slavery before the Revolution will exist in every British colony, from New York to Pennsylvania to Maryland. It is legal. It is practiced in all colonies. It just depends on the size of the colony and how those slaves are used. But I want you to keep in mind, these are not people brought here as indentured servants. They're not recognized as having rights. These slaves are human beings which are purchased by other human beings for the use of their labor and nothing more. Some slaves will be given their freedom. Some slaves will be treated like indentured servants. The first 25 or 30 years of slavery on the North American continent is clouded in mystery. For example, we don't know exactly what happened to that first cargo of slaves. We know that they were sold at the docks, but we don't know what ultimately happened to them. We know that there will be free African Americans in the South. We know that there will be enslaved African Americans in the North. Each colony will handle slavery somewhat differently, but we need to understand that there is slavery in every British colony. That's those slaves that came to North America and the ones that will continue to come to North America until 1808 are going to be part of what we called the triangular trade or the Atlantic World Trade Networks. What we mean by that, crudely, there's a triangle that we refer to. This is the interconnectedness of nations that exist on the edges of the Atlantic Ocean. For Europeans will go to North America and establish colonies. These colonies need labor. So Europeans will go to Africa and purchase human beings who have been captured and sold into slavery. Europeans will purchase these Africans. They will ship them to North America over what we call the Middle Passage. And the loading of African Americans onto boats was illustrated on the former slide. You can go back for yourself and see how crammed in people were. Thousands died on the trip across the Middle Passage because of their malnourishment and maltreatment aboard these vessels. Once they get to North America, these slaves will be sold on the open market to the highest bidder. They will then be used to produce tobacco, sugar, cotton, to cut timber, to raise corn, to fish, to make rope, to do any number of jobs in the colonial economy. But the colonial economy is based on producing raw materials to be sent back to the mother country. That's what mercantilism is. Mercantilism is an economic concept wherein a country establishes a colony in order to enrich itself. The colony produces raw materials that are sent back to the mother country. The mother country then makes finished goods to sell to other countries, or if those other countries don't want to purchase them, they sell them back to the colonies. Very often, colonies are not allowed to produce their own finished goods under mercantilist economies. You are required to purchase goods from your mother country. You must transport raw materials on ships built and owned by people from your mother country, going directly to ports in your mother country. So it's a never-ending loop. Raw materials go from North America to Europe. Those raw materials are then turned into finished goods like textiles, rum, weapons, chairs, pottery, metals, etc., which are then sent either back to the North American colonies for sale, or they are used to trade with African slave colonies to purchase human beings to be sent back to the North American colonies and then used to produce more raw materials. This is the rise of capitalism as we understand it today. If capitalism is making the greatest profit by producing a good at the lowest possible cost of production, slave labor is the basis for capitalism and the cause of the rise of capitalism in the known world. But that's for more in-depth history classes. Next week, we will delve more into colonial North America and its development over time. This has just been kind of the rude framework of the development of British North America. We'll go into a little heavier detail next week. If you have any questions, never forget to drop me an email. I hope everybody has a great weekend.